This is APYouthNet.
Hello and welcome back to the APYouthNet talk show, where we'll be looking at some of the key issues affecting youth employment in Asia Pacific today. I'm Sophie Fisher from the International Labour Organization. Today's show is a bit special because I'm joined by all the ILO's focal points on youth employment throughout Asia Pacific, as well as other ILO and UN experts. They've been meeting in Bangkok to discuss current initiatives on youth employment and to create a plan of action. Thank you all very much for being here today. The 2013 ILO Global Employment Trends report found that total global unemployment had risen to 197 million people worldwide. More than 73 million of those are young people. What's more, in Asia Pacific, young people are more than twice as likely to be unemployed as adults. So in today's programme, we'll be looking at this rise in youth unemployment and how the region is responding to the challenge. First, let's set the scene a little. Last summer, 5,000 delegates from the ILO's 185 member states met in Geneva at the International Labour Conference. Their discussions led to an ILO resolution that called for immediate, targeted and renewed action to tackle the youth employment crisis. So, why is this resolution important? Gianni Rossas is the youth employment specialist at the ILO's headquarters in Geneva. Gianni, so what is so special about this resolution? Why does it matter and what were the priorities it set out?
Well, as you rightly said, Sophie, this resolution was adopted by 185 member states in delegations that represented governments, employers' organizations and trade unions. So it's based on a consensus amongst all the participants in the international conference. So it's a framework, it's a global framework that gives guidance to countries that want to address the youth employment crisis. So this is basically the main feature of the resolution.
And what were some of the priorities that it set out?
It sets out 5 main policy priorities that countries can refer to while revising their policies and their interventions that span from supportive measures to boost jobs for young people. At the same time, addressing the skills mismatch through employability initiatives, that is the transition from school to work, which has become quite longer also due to the recent economic and financial crisis. At the same time, it also gives guidance on how to support young people who are more disadvantaged than others through targeted interventions and labor market measures, and also gives guidance on how to improve the quality of the jobs that are available to young people through rights at work, as well as how to support young people who are willing to establish their own economic activity through entrepreneurship and self-employment.
And why do you think it's so important that the resolution talked about the quality of jobs? Because many people say the issue is the quantity of employment.
Yes, it's not only a matter of quantity, it's also a matter of quality of jobs, because especially young people, they are affected by low quality jobs. They are into temporary employment, and also they are affected more than adults by working poverty.
How are they affected more than others by working poverty?
They're affected more than others because compared to adults, they are overrepresented in nearly all countries from where data are available.
Right, okay. Let's look a little bit at individual countries now, because we've got most of the main countries in Asia Pacific represented here today. And let's hear a little bit about what can be done and what is being done to respond to this resolution at the conference. Let's turn first of all to the Philippines and Ruth, Georgia.
Hi, Sophie. I just wanted to take off from what Gianni said on the issue of how young people in the Philippines are generally, there's a lot of youth unemployment. In fact, in 2010, we had a 17.4 youth unemployment rate and has decreased to 16.3. That's still large if you take a look at the rates. But what is more important that we've noticed is the issue of vulnerable employment among young people. Largely, there are many young people who are not able to earn minimum wage. They lack social protection, as well as they have no opportunity to be part of an organized group so that they can air out their issues. So this is really a huge challenge in the Philippines. The other issues that we come across is really the issue of skills and jobs mismatch. You know, in the Philippines, you have over 650,000 young people that enter the labor force every year. And that does not include those don't come from formal education. So with these challenges, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and the ILO has constantly been working with the Department of Labor and Employment to, one, look at how policies need to be coherent and how programs need to be able to address focused interventions, such as, for instance, technical vocational skills training. This is something, the quality of these trainings have to respond to the demands of the industries that are currently in the country, as well as entrepreneurship training. Similarly, we want young people to see entrepreneurship as a path towards becoming more productive versus just looking at wage and salary work. Other interventions also include strengthening labor market information. All of this and facilitating employment and information so that young people can find the right job and enter into these types of jobs that meet the requirements or the skills that they have. So these are some of the very concrete things that the country has worked with. Of course, the ILO providing the technical assistance so that this will continue in the coming years. We've seen some progress with that decrease in youth unemployment, but there's still so much more that needs to be done.
And presumably when you're trying to tackle the skills to job mismatch and the school to work transition, it's particularly important that you involve employers and workers organizations as well. So how do you do that?
There's a lot of consultation that happens with the private sector as well as with workers' groups. More often than not, it's the private sector that will tell you what are the things that make a young person more employable. Let's take, for instance, the issue of having soft skills or life skills. Employers, especially in the Philippines, in the BPO industry, say that there are jobs that are being offered. But the challenge is, how come young people can't enter into these jobs? Maybe because they don't have the right behavior, the right attitude, the right work ethic, and this means a lot for employers.
Soft skills, is that something that you have found is a big issue? Other people in this group?
In fact, we have a chart out there that puts on top as a youth employment challenge the lack of soft skills, because they have the academic prowess, they have the qualifications, but that rounded education that includes soft skills is not there. So when they go to the table for an interview, for example, for wage employment, they fail miserably. Because two things really, soft skills also I would say includes business English. English is taught in Sri Lanka as a subject rather than a skill. So you cannot take it or translate it into the world of work. And that becomes a huge problem for young people, especially young people from vulnerable groups. Though we have compulsory school education from 5 to 14, and education is free right up to tertiary level, they don't learn English in a sort of an equitable manner. The language, the quality of the teaching is not equitable. And therefore, they are at a distinct disadvantage as young people. So we have lost 2 generations of English-speaking youth.
So to solve these kind of soft skill issues, you have to drill right down into government policies and systems in many, many different sectors.
Yes, and that has been recognized. We've just launched the employment policy for Sri Lanka in October, and soft skills comes right on top. Youth employment has been integrated into the main overarching employment policy. We also have a separate youth employment national action plan, and a roadmap has just been developed, and it's on its way for ratification. And the ILO, of course, is helping roll out a few parts, few components with technical support. And the pilot is in 1 province of the 9 provinces in this country.
Let me pick up with you another issue that was raised by Ruth, which was the question of entrepreneurship for young people. I think in quite a lot of Asian cultures, somehow starting your own business or being an entrepreneur is seen as a rather sort of second grade activity rather than going out and getting a job, a formal 9 to 5, Monday to Friday job. Is this a problem you have in Sri Lanka, and how have you got over it if it is?
Yes, we haven't still got over it. We are getting there. We're trying to really very hard. And the ILO is pushing entrepreneurship in a big way because we have very limited public sector jobs where youth really aspire to go into public sector jobs because of security and pension and that kind of thing. And we have youth who are uneducated and youth who are educated, both jobless. So we are trying to integrate entrepreneurship into the university curricula, and we have already introduced it into secondary education through the Know About Business program, and we are hoping that it'll find us the solution we are looking for. However, I must say attitude on entrepreneurship is the biggest hurdle, because parental attitude, they don't want their children being entrepreneurs. They'd rather have them as doctors and lawyers, if at all. The other thing is the options overload, because we'll say the previous generation had few options, whereas now they have so many. They have a cafeteria of options. I don't know which way to go, and whether entrepreneurship is just a solution or just a second-hand solution. And they might jump back into some other option later on along the road.
Right. I'd like to bring in Edward Bernard at this point, since he's come all the way from the Pacific. And the Pacific has one of the worst youth employment problems in the entire region, I believe, Edward. I mean, the rate there is far worse than twice, I believe. In other parts of Asia Pacific, young people are more than twice as likely to be unemployed as adults, but I think in the Pacific it's worse than that, yeah?
Thank you, Sophie. I think in the Pacific it's about 4 times more likely that a young person will not get an employment compared to an elderly person. Last year, the Secretary of the Pacific Community brought out the figure of 23% unemployment rate for young people in the Pacific. And that has certainly raised a lot of eyebrows with the Pacific leaders. And in fact, it was the young people that identified youth employment as one of the major issues and challenges facing young people in the Pacific, and the Pacific leaders, which is the Prime Minister of the Pacific, endorsed that issue as a major issue that should be addressed. And 50%, more than 50% of the population in the Pacific are young people, and there's a majority of the young people of this population are actually not in employment, training, or in education, and this puts a lot of pressure on the already limited resources that exist in small Pacific Island countries. So the issue is huge. It's a big challenge, and I think the governments have recognized that.
So with such a big problem, how do you, in the ILO office there, where do you start? What do you focus on?
I think we focus first on ensuring that youth employment is actually integrated at the policy level, in the youth policies, in the national strategic plans, and that it also is reflected in the operationalizing of interventions through budget allocation and resources that the countries put together in addressing the issue.
Right. Okay, we've heard quite a lot now from ILO countries where the ILO has programs. Let's hear a little bit now from some of the countries where the ILO doesn't have specific programs. Perhaps we could start with China and some of the ways that you're tackling the youth employment problem without the support of a program.
Actually, our cooperation with national counterpart, we built the existing experience from the previous like SIB projects. Now we introduced the Know About Business to Chinese university. Actually, we are not encouraging them. The purpose is not encouraging them to start up their business, but they need to familiar with business environment, and this also enhance them to be more familiar with enterprise cultures, so to strengthen the employabilities. We actually, ILO just bring the international experience, expertise, and trainers, and national counterpart will just implement this program on themselves, by themselves. So actually the university has already used this kind of training as a selective course for the university graduates. So if they want to start up their own business, and then the University Employment Guidance Center will also link them with a microcredit loan. Otherwise, they will also use their knowledge through this kind of training to apply in their own, the new career.
Many people, the Chinese have such a strong reputation for business. Many people outside the country would find it strange that you have to teach people about, young people, about entrepreneurship. Somehow is it they lack knowledge, or is it the social pressure to get a formal job? What is it?
Actually, now it's like the Sri Lanka's experience. For the parents, they go for the public servants choice first, and then to encourage their kids to start up their own business. In China now, I think more people wants to go to the public servant than ever, because now since we are transit into market economy, civil servant job is more secure than in the enterprise. So although the university graduate is facing a big challenge in the employment, but this, on the other hand, China is also facing the shortage of skilled workers, but they still not to choose to go to the vocational training school. They still prefer to go to the academic universities. So now I think we need to promote how the vocational training system has more role to play in the near future, or how the linkage between vocational training system and academic system to promote these young people to have more employabilities.
Mm. Okay, let's move seamlessly from China to the other economic giant in this region, India. Anand, does what Huang said resonate with you? Young people, they want jobs in the civil service, and this issue of the right skills for the employers. Are these problems in India too?
This problem does exist, but it's mostly in the rural areas. In the urban areas, people are more looking forward to a corporate job, and that's what the ILO is helping the government of India and our other social partners in getting into self-employment through SFIB, although we do not have a program yet, but in small ways we are trying to promote self-employment.
And do you see, are there a lot of policies at government level and through the social partners, the workers and the employers, to encourage young people to perhaps think a little bit more broadly about what they're going to do?
We do plan those activities. The government itself is showing signs of more openness to accept these ideas.
Of course, many people see a link between youth unemployment and social instability. So perhaps we could hear from a country like Pakistan, which has a big youth population. Is this a link that you see there, and one that concerns people?
Well, I think particularly when I'm referring to the situation in Pakistan, there is a very strong link between youth employment and peace development, because you might see there are a lot of crises and the economy is shrinking. The economy is not producing so much jobs which are required, and the population, particularly the young population, it's growing. So ultimately there is a need to increase job opportunities. It's not happening. It's not happening in the formal sector. The informal sector is growing, but it has no security. So the young people usually they are losing their confidence on the system, and they think that the system is not working for them. So that's why it's very important, and it's an urgent call from the youth, because we have been listening to them through the youth forums and youth organizations. There is a need to engage them first, and then of course to provide them adequate employment opportunities. And for that, I think, just like we mentioned, and we have been talking to our specialists as well as, and we have been listening to our other colleagues from the countries, all these activities, the career counseling, the vocational skills, the entrepreneurship, all these things needs to be done in the integrated fashion, of course, because one activity in isolation can't work. So we need to have them all integrated and then develop some role models for them.
And do you feel that the government is pushing the youth employment issue up its policy agenda enough to respond to these concerns of the young people?
Definitely, the government recognizes the need for the youth employment. They have put the youth employment in all their policies and plans and the vision documents, development frameworks. But unfortunately, due to the resources crunch with the government, we don't see actually resources allocation for the youth employment in the country. There are a few isolated activities which are not very well connected with all the relevant institutions or departments which are supposed to support them. So there is a need to develop a proper coordinated platform for them and then take it in a very organized and cohesive manner. So,
and do the other social partners, the workers and employers organizations, do they have any capacity to support the government in this?
The workers, employers, they're also supportive, yes, and they own this idea. However, there is the issue of capacity to provide that support to the youth. They recognize it, they own the issue, but they can't do it unless there is some capacity developed.
Matthew, just to get a bit of a regional perspective here, this question of young people having a very set idea, or their parents and the people who influence them having a very set idea of what they're going to do and what is appropriate. Is this something that is common across the region?
I'm not sure it is. I think it's actually one of the largest challenges. And in the discussions that we have had the past 2 days, career guidance and counseling is something that has come on top of the agenda in many countries and in all sub-regions. Why? Because it's very important for young people to mature their reflection as to what they would like to do in the future. And they need all the help that they can get, either at school or in the vocational training centers that they may attend, and really from an early age start thinking about accumulating some level of job experience through internship or apprenticeship programs, because if not, they will then come to the point where they actually have to get into the world of work, and they will increase the chances of failure if they have not matured their reflection strongly enough. And I think the discussions have relied a lot around this the past 2 days. And really, the reason why all these youth employment focal points are here is to try to create some type of a bridge or to make a link between what the countries need to be looking at, what the government's commitments are, and what the concrete actions can look like on the ground. We are talking about the resolution of the ILC. A year before that, the president of Indonesia at the ILC 100 in Geneva made a call for a global coalition for youth employment. Well, if we are talking about creating some kind of a coalition, we are talking about a network, and a network starts with partnerships, and it starts with action planning. And so this is what we have been looking at.
And of course, one of the partners in this enterprise has to be the young people themselves. And this, I think, is something that came up earlier and is also in the call for action. But practically speaking, young people, you know, they're finishing their education, they're busy looking for work, they have a lot of things on their mind. They're not in the systems in the same way that older people are. How do we involve them in a meaningful way to get their opinions on shaping policies and creating systems that are actually going to help their peer group? How do we do that?
Well, I think it starts at home. It starts around a dinner table for them to discuss with their parents about what they would like to be doing in the future and how best they will be helpful and in a best way to contribute to society. And it starts also at the local level. And here I'm referring to local governance, to include young people at the councils, to include not only talking about involving the private sector and civil societies, workers, but to make sure that in those represented, the young people have their voice. Our colleague from India was talking about the differences between rural and urban India, and of course there is this big phenomenon of urban migration. Well, one of the ways to address urban migration is to give more incentives to young people to be more actively involved in their local areas, and giving them a voice on the ground is absolutely essential.
Right, okay. You mentioned partnerships there, and of course no one agency or organisation can possibly solve the youth employment challenge. So I'd like to come back to Gianni here, because he has a bigger perspective perhaps from headquarters, and ask him, what do you think are some of the ways that different bodies can coordinate and work together in partnerships? Because a partnership is stronger than individual organisations working separately.
Thanks, Sophie. I think that already the colleagues have highlighted several types of partnerships between public institutions that are in charge of public policy making, but also the private sector that is the main creator of jobs nowadays, partnerships with representatives of the world of work, that they bring in their perspective and experience, so employers' organizations and trade unions, and partnerships with young people themselves. Now, looking at global level, because then we can talk about partnerships starting from the local to the national, to the regional, and to the global level. So it's a matter, addressing the youth employment crisis, it's a matter of collective concern. So of course, joining forces together and exploiting the synergies that they are generated by the partnership, it's likely to have a higher impact than interventions that they are taken by an individual organization, by an individual institution. So, and we have examples. We have established partnerships across the multilateral system with other UN agencies at global level, with trickle-down effects at the country level. So Ruth was mentioning the work that we have been doing in the Philippines, which is actually the result of the commitment and the engagement of a partnership across several UN organizations, and at the same time involving several government institutions, civil society, and the private sector. So certainly partnerships are, or collective action, it has always a greater impact. But also when we talk about huge challenges like the ones we are facing today in terms of addressing the youth employment crisis, solutions stemming from partnerships and collective action are more likely to support the creation of jobs for young people and the creation of decent jobs for young people.
So to be successful and to be sustainable.
So, of course.
You mentioned the partnerships involving the private sector, and I'd just like to probe you a little bit more on that, because the UN people expect us to be involved in these long-term social issues. The private sector people think of as thinking much more short-term and much more bottom line. How easy have you found it to engage them in this, and how much do you feel that they are on board?
Well, my experience is it's quite positive because, and I believe that the private sector has a strong interest in engaging in the creation of decent jobs for young people, because we know that young people who are productive workers are also active consumers. So, this is also acting on the multiplier effect that addresses the crisis from different angles. So the private sector is quite aware of this. So, and there are several initiatives across the world that they really show the greater impact that these interventions they have, and also the great commitment that the private sector has in generating decent jobs for young people.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for in this show. So I'd like to thank everybody in the studio who's joined us here today for their contributions. And if you have any ideas for subjects you'd like to hear us and our experts discuss, please drop us a line. You can find the contact details at www.apyouthnet.ilo.org. Once again, thanks for joining us, and goodbye.
This has been an AP YouthNet production.